Here is something almost nobody tells you until it's too late. The day you die, the bank freezes your account. Not in a week, not after the funeral, the moment the bank is told you've passed. Any account that's in your name alone is locked. And here's the part that catches families completely off guard. The money is still sitting right there. Your money, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars of it, and your husband or your wife cannot touch a single cent of it. Not for the funeral, not for the mortgage payment that's due, not for the grocery. It's frozen sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months, until the estate is sorted out with paperwork and very often probate. I have watched grieving spouses go from a comfortable household to genuinely broke overnight, not because there was no money, but because they couldn't get at it. And the reason I'm telling you this today is that there is one simple, completely free thing you can do right now in a few minutes that stops this from ever happening to the person you love most. So stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll know exactly what to fill in and what to fix. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Thorne, and for 15 years I worked inside Canada's retirement tax and benefit system. The pensions, the paperwork, the rules that quietly govern a senior's money, and what happens to it when you're gone. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not here to frighten you. What I do on this channel is take the rules that are written to be missed and lay them out in plain English so that nothing about your own money or your family's ever catches you off guard. And this is one of the biggest ones people miss. So let me make it real, because a warning like this only lands when you see it happen to a person. Picture a woman, I'll call her Eleanor, 71 years old. She and her husband Frank were married 44 years. They had a normal, sensible arrangement, the same one millions of couples have. The main checking account, the one the pension went into and the bills came out of, was in Frank's name. Not because they were hiding anything from each other, it was just his account from long before they retired, and it worked, so they never changed it. Then Frank has a heart attack and he's gone. And in the middle of the worst week of Eleanor's life, she goes to pay for the funeral, and she discovers that the account their whole life ran through is frozen. She can't withdraw from it. The pre-authorized payments coming out of it have stopped, so now the hydro and the property tax are bouncing too. The bank is polite but firm. Until the estate is settled and the paperwork is in, that money is locked. Eleanor, who is not poor, who has money sitting in that account, spends the next several weeks borrowing from her daughter to bury her own husband. That is not a rare horror story. That is Tuesday at banks across this country, and almost none of it had to happen. So let's understand why the bank does this, because it's not the bank being cruel, and understanding it is the first step to getting around it. When you die, everything you own in your sole name becomes your quote-unquote estate, and the law says nobody can just help themselves to it. The bank has a legal duty to protect that money until the right person, the executor, the estate representative, is properly confirmed and the estate is dealt with correctly. So the moment the bank is notified of a death, it does the cautious thing. It freezes the sole account so that not $1 goes out the door until it's certain it's going to the right place. From the bank side, that's responsible. From the family side, standing at the counter, unable to pay for a coffin, it's devastating. Both of those things are true at once. The freeze is normal, and it's protective, and it can still ruin the month you can least afford to have ruined. Our job today is to make sure your family never feels the second part. Now, before I give you the fix, I need you to understand exactly what gets frozen and what doesn't, because this is where the whole thing turns. What gets frozen is an account in your name alone, a sole account. That's the trap. But here is the first bit of good news, and it's a bit weight joint account. An account held by two people together with what's called the right of survivorship is generally not frozen when one of you dies. Because of survivorship, the surviving co-owner simply becomes the sole owner automatically, and the money keeps flowing without missing a beat. So for a married couple, one of the simplest, most powerful protections in the world is making sure the everyday account, the one the pension lands in and the bills come out of, is a joint account with your spouse, not a sole account in one name. If Frank and Eleanor's checking account had been joint, Eleanor would have walked in that week and the money would have simply been hers. No freeze, no borrowing, no humiliation. That one structural choice, joint instead of sole, is the difference between a spouse who's protected and a spouse who's locked out. Now, I have to be honest with you because I always am, and there are two cautions on joint accounts that a responsible person tells you and a clickbait video doesn't. First, if you live in Quebec, the rules are different. A joint account there can be temporarily frozen and then split. So Quebec residents especially should talk to their notary about the right setup. And second, this one matters. A joint account between a parent and an adult child is a different animal from a joint account between spouses. When a parent adds a grown child to their account just for convenience, the law doesn't automatically treat that money as a gift to the child. it can get pulled back into the estate and fought over, and it can accidentally cut out the other children. So joint with your spouse for survivorship, wonderful. Joint with one of your kids as a shortcut, get proper advice first, because it can cause the exact family mess you were trying to avoid. I'd rather tell you the whole truth than a tidy half of it. So that's the everyday account handled. But now let's talk about the big money, the RRSPs, the RRIFs, the TFSAs, the registered accounts where most of a senior's savings actually live, because this is where that one free form comes in, and it is the single most valuable thing in this entire video. On these registered accounts, you are allowed to name a beneficiary, and when you name a beneficiary, something wonderful happens. On your death, that money goes directly to the person you named. It does not sit in the frozen estate. It does not wait for probate. It skips the whole locked up process entirely and lands with your spouse or your children or whoever you chose, often within weeks, not months. The form to do it is free. It takes a few minutes at your bank or with whoever holds the account, and it is hands down the most powerful free move a senior can make to protect their family's access to money. And for a married couple, there's an even better version of it on your TFSA specifically. Instead of just naming your spouse as a beneficiary, you can name them as what's called a successor holder. The difference sounds like jargon, but it's lovely in practice. Naming your spouse the successor holder of your TFSA means the entire account simply rolls over and becomes theirs seamlessly, keeping all its tax-free room intact. It's the smoothest possible handover of that money, and it costs you nothing but the few minutes to fill it in. So, if you have a TFSA and a spouse, that successor holder designation is one of the kindest, simplest things you can set up for them. Now, here is the trap inside the fix, and I need you to really hear this because it undoes everything if you get it wrong. A beneficiary designation only helps if it's filled in, and if it's filled in correctly and kept up to date, and you would not believe how often it isn't. I have seen people who filled in a beneficiary form 30 years ago and never looked at it again, and it still names an ex-spouse they divorced 2 decades back, or a person who has since died, or nobody at all. And the cruel thing about these forms is that they generally beat your will. If your RRIF names your first wife as the beneficiary, and your will leaves everything to your current wife, in most cases, that RRIF money can still go to the first wife because the designation on the account wins. Your will does not quietly fix an out-of-date beneficiary form. So it is not enough to have made a will and felt organized. You have to actually go and check what's written on each registered account today and make sure the name on it is the person you'd actually want to receive that money now, not the person you'd have named in 1995. This one check has saved families from disasters I couldn't fully describe to you. Let me give you a real example of how that goes wrong, because it's the kind of thing that tears families apart quietly years after the funeral. Picture a man, I'll call him Gordon, who married young, divorced in his 40s, and remarried a wonderful woman named Carol, who he spent the next 30 years with. Gordon did everything he thought he was supposed to. He made a will, and it left everything to Carol. He felt organized, responsible, done. But back when he first opened his RRSP decades earlier, he'd named his first wife as the beneficiary. And in 30 years, through the divorce, through the new marriage, he never once went back and changed that form. He didn't even remember it existed. So when Gordon died, his will said Carol, but his RRSP said his first wife. And the RRSP designation won. That retirement money, a huge chunk of everything he'd saved, went to a woman he'd been divorced from for 30 years, and Carol had no practical way to claw it back. Gordon didn't do anything malicious, he just never checked one old form. And that is exactly why I'm not going to let you leave this video without checking yours. And that leads to the other big misunderstanding I want to clear up, because so many people rely on it and shouldn't. The idea that I have a will, so my spouse will be fine. A will is essential. Please have one. But a will does not stop the freeze, and a will does not give your spouse fast access. In fact, a will is often what has to go through probate before the frozen soul account is released. And let me explain probate plainly, because the word scares people, and most don't actually know what it is. Probate is simply the court process that officially confirms your will is valid and confirms who the executor is so that banks and others can safely hand over your money to them. It's a normal, legitimate step, but it takes time, often weeks and sometimes many months. And in most provinces, it costs a fee based on the size of the estate. And here's the key point for today. While that sole account is waiting on probate, it stays frozen. So the will is the map for sorting out the estate eventually. It is not the key that lets your spouse buy groceries next week. The whole reason those beneficiary and joint account tools are so powerful is that they sidestep probate entirely. The money moves straight to your person while the rest of the estate is still grinding through the process. And here's one more practical thing your family will be grateful you knew, because it eases the very first bill they'll face. When a person who paid into the Canada Pension Plan dies, the estate can apply for the CPP death benefit, a one-time payment meant to help with exactly these costs. It isn't automatic. Someone has to apply for it with a form, usually within a set time, and it isn't enormous, but in that frozen account week when the funeral home wants a deposit and the main account is locked, knowing that payment exists and how to claim it can genuinely take pressure off. So make sure whoever will handle your affairs knows to look into the CPP death benefit and doesn't leave that money sitting unclaimed the way so many grieving families do. The things that give fast, unfrozen access are the ones we've been talking about: the joint account with survivorship and the beneficiary and successor holder designations. Those work alongside your will, and in the moment that matters most. They're what actually protect the person left behind. So let me settle this for you the way I always try to, because I don't want you carrying dread out of this video. I want you carrying a to-do list. None of this is a reason to panic, and the freeze itself is not some scandal. It's a normal protective rule doing its job. The entire problem is simply that most people never set things up so the money can reach their spouse quickly, and that is completely, easily fixable for free in an afternoon. The difference between a spouse who's protected and a spouse who's locked out is not wealth and it's not luck. It's a joint account, a couple of beneficiary forms, and a conversation. That's it. That's the whole thing. And every bit of it is within your reach this week. And before I give you the exact steps, the short checklist that takes all of this off your mind, let me mention one quick thing, because so many of you have asked me to put everything in one place, everything I cover on this channel, what freezes and what doesn't. The beneficiary and successor holder forms, probate, the CPP death benefit, and the plain words to use with your bank and your family. I've put into one plain English guide called the Canadian Seniors Money Playbook. It's written for a real person, not a bureaucrat, so you can actually sit down and use it. It's the same guidance I'd give my own parents. If you want it, the link is in the description below. But everything you need to take the first step is right here in this video. Now here's exactly what to do. First, look at your everyday checking account, the one the pension goes into and the bills come out of. If you're married and it's in one name only, go to the bank and make it a joint account with your spouse with right of survivorship. That single change means the day one of you is gone, the other still has money to live on with no freeze. Second, go through every registered account you own, your RRSP, your RRIF, your TFSA, and check who's named as the beneficiary, not who you think is named, who is actually written down. Fix any that are out of date, and if you don't have one named at all, name one. Third, if you have a spouse and a TFSA, ask specifically to name them the successor holder, so it rolls straight over to them. Fourth, make sure you actually have a valid up-to-date will, because it still handles everything that isn't covered by those designations, but understand it's the slow track, not the fast one. And fifth, the one everyone forgets, tell someone. Tell your spouse or a trusted child where the accounts are, where the will is, and what you've set up. The best organized estate in the country is useless if the person you left behind doesn't know it exists. A single afternoon and one honest conversation, and you have protected your family from the exact nightmare that happened to Ellen. And let me give you one more for the person watching this who isn't planning ahead, but is living it right now. Someone has already died and the account is already frozen. Don't despair, because there's something most people don't realize. Even with a frozen account, banks will very often pay certain urgent things directly. If you bring the bank the funeral invoice, many will pay the funeral home straight out of the frozen account. They'll cut the payment to the funeral home directly even before probate because they recognize it has to be done. The same is often true for the probate fees themselves and the deceased's final taxes. So if you're standing in that awful week, don't assume the door is completely shut. Go to the bank. Bring the death certificate and the funeral bill and ask them plainly, will you release funds to pay the funeral directly? Very often the answer is yes. It won't unlock everything, but it can lift the single heaviest, most urgent burden off your shoulders at exactly the moment you need it lifted. Let me bring it home, because I want this one to stick. The day you die, any account in your name alone is frozen, and your spouse cannot touch that money for the funeral, the bills, anything until the estate is settled, which can take months. But a joint account with your spouse isn't frozen. It simply passes to them. And on your registered accounts, one free form, a beneficiary designation, or a successor holder designation on a TFSA sends that money straight to the person you love, skipping the freeze and skipping probate. The catch is that these forms have to be filled in and kept current because an out-of-date designation beats your will. None of it is complicated, none of it costs $1, and all of it can be done this week. Because here's the truth of it. Nobody at the bank is going to phone you up and warn you that your life's account will lock the day you die and leave your spouse stranded. The system just runs quietly in the background and leaves your family to discover it at the worst possible moment, or leaves you right now with the chance to quietly make sure they never do. The most loving, powerful thing you can do is exactly what you're doing this minute, learning how it works, and then spending one small afternoon making sure the person you leave behind is protected, not locked out. If this helped you, and I hope it genuinely did, do two things for me. Take a look at the pinned comment and the description where I've left the key steps written out so they're there when you're ready to act on them. And subscribe, because every week I break down another one of these rules in plain English so that nothing about your money or your families ever catches you by surprise. I'm Jake Morris. To look after yourselves. Look after the people you love. And I'll see you in the next one.